By now you know that learning outcomes are important to any training program. To prepare you to write these outcomes, we'll review their meaning and their function, as well as several types of them in this video. Learning outcomes are statements that begin with an action verb and describe the KSAOs, behaviors, and competencies that trainees are expected to learn and demonstrate at the end of training. These statements also describe the level at which trainees are expected to perform the behavior and the conditions under which they are expected to perform. Essentially, learning outcomes are the goals that we want trainees to aim for. Ideally, they then create customized learning goals that are related to the learning outcomes of the training program they're about to begin. Ask yourself, what do trainees have to do to convince you that they've learned what it is you wanted them to learn? You can review examples of learning outcomes on this and the next Canvas page. You may be wondering, are learning outcomes really all that important? The answer is yes, absolutely. These statements have a number of benefits. They help trainees focus in on a handful of goals instead of trying to tackle every new piece of information or every new skill that might be required by the training but isn't necessarily important enough to be considered an outcome. As I designed this course, the weekly outcomes were first identified by using the information the business school had collected through its needs assessment. Administrators asked a focus group of HR professionals to identify the competencies that students in this major should try to develop before they graduate. These weekly outcomes helped me focus on the most important training content, helped me create the application-based assignments, and helped me ensure that the content was tied to the HRMG's overarching strategy to prepare you for a career in HR. HR managers might use learning outcomes to make sure that the programs are aligned with the company's business strategy and with the HR department's strategy as well. Top leaders may evaluate the performance of the HR department by reviewing whether learning outcomes are being met. If the department consistently meets its outcomes, great. If it doesn't, the department may need something, there may be some other issue that needs to be addressed. The outcomes of a training program will drive decisions about its design, from content to methods to materials. We should be aware of the different types of outcomes that we're aiming for. There are different ways of categorizing these outcomes. We'll look at one framework that splits them into 5 categories in this lecture. First, we have outcomes related to learning verbal information. Specialized knowledge like names, dates, keywords, and other facts. Training that teaches employees about a product or a service, for example, may include several outcomes related to verbal information. When we want trainees to apply verbal information to solve problems, interact with customers, or innovate, we'll need to make sure that we measure intellectual skills. Training that teaches customer service skills, for example, is probably going to include several outcomes related to intellectual skills. Cognitive strategies influence what trainees pay attention to and how they pay attention to it. It also influences what they remember and how they remember it, as well as their decisions and their problem-solving capabilities. Think of cognitive strategies as the bridge between verbal information and intellectual skills. Cognitive strategies allow people to apply verbal information and develop their intellectual skills. Training that teaches people how to make better decisions or solve problems would likely focus on these outcomes. We can also emphasize the learning of physical movements or motor skills related to a task. Training programs that teach people how to fix a product by showing them the correct sequence of hand and body movements would be an example of a program that would use these outcomes. Sometimes training attempts to change people's attitudes about or feelings toward the training topic. The assumption is that these internal states, emotions, and attitudes influence behavior indirectly, and by changing them, we can change behavior. For example, some training programs focus on improving employees' attitudes toward customers and attempt to convince them that following the organization's policy about interacting with customers is important to job success. Most training programs will include outcomes from more than one category. Now that you're more familiar with learning outcomes, complete the writing tutorial on this and the next Canvas page to practice writing learning outcomes.